All right. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Flux.
And I'm Ben McKenzie.
Together we are Pratchat. And this is not an episode, as usual, of our podcast about Terry Pratchett. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're doing a special discussion for today.
Yes. And this is so exciting. Liz, I don't know. Did you ever think you'd get a chance to read the book we're going to discuss today? Because I did not.
Honestly, I hadn't really registered how rare it was. Like I hadn't sort of mentally comprehended it. So I feel like if I had, the answer would definitely be no.
Yeah. Yes. Let's not leave you in suspense in case they've left it as a mystery for you. We don't know. We're recording this in advance. We are discussing two books, really. We're discussing The Carpet People, 1971, and The Carpet People, 1992. That's a nice edition you've got there, Liz. Is that the hardcover from 92?
It is. And it's got great. A very interesting picture of Terry Pratchett in it that I didn't find until I read it for the first time very recently. And I got to the last page. I was like, well, here's going to be him in his hat. But no, it is
no hat. What is it? Is he leaning on it? Hang on, I'm gonna pin you so that it's big for everyone. What's he leaning
on? I think it's some logs. It looks like logs to me.
Yeah, it's very rustic, kind of out in the bush. He's got his sunglasses on. He's looking very cool.
He looks very cool. He's got kind of like a black turtleneck going on.
He's got a real cool dad energy.
But absolutely, if I saw this man on the street, I would not go, that is Terry Pratchett. So it's just a very different vibe of photo for him.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
That is not what we're here to talk about today,
though. But that is great.
I guess it is a difference.
There's no photo of him in the other edition of the book, which I would love to show you the cover of, but we've been very kindly lent a very special artifact, because this is we've got a copy here. I'm going to put it on the screen. I'll hang on. I'll show it on the screen. I've got a camera set up. We've tried to go fancy for this today, so I've got a special camera set up just so I can show the book. I'll just make sure that's lined up. There we go. And I'll pin this just for a second. So this is the 1971 edition of The Carpet People, Terry Pratchett's first ever published book. Now, it doesn't have the dust jacket, which does have a beautiful illustration. You can look that up online. And this copy, now we both read this copy. It's just that I read it second, so I've got it here. But it was in a library, Palmerston North Children's Library. I don't know if that still exists. But it's still got, there it is, The Carpet People, and it's still got signed. This is a signed copy. So this is very special. Not signed to the person who currently owns it, I don't think, but signed nonetheless. And
I got to that page and I almost screamed. I was like, why am I being allowed to handle this?
I know. I feel like I should be wearing gloves. I'm being very careful. I have washed my hands several times.
I've actually read that sometimes gloves can be worse because the tiny little fibers in them can damage pages.
Oh, okay. So, and here's the imprint, so you can see, it's 1971, and there was only, if I remember rightly, I'll come back to this, but I won't stay there forever. If I remember rightly, there was only something like 3,000 copies, I think. It was a small print.
That's terrifying.
I mean, look, new author who was 24 at the time, who had started writing this story around the age of 17. As described in the blurb for this later edition. So this is my edition of The Carpet People. This is the one I first read. This is a 1995 reprint of the Corgi paperback. So it's pretty much the same as your edition, but just a little bit later in paperback. As it says, written by Terry Pratchett, age 17, and master storyteller Terry Pratchett, aged 43. And it does say hilarious fantasy. And I think I don't know. I think we should just get into this, but I think the biggest difference between these two, because he rewrote it when he was republished, is that the original's not funny, Liz. It's not a comedy.
No, it is it takes itself very seriously.
Yeah.
But yeah, my blurb says this book had two authors, one age 17, one age 43. Both of them were Terry Pratchett. And I love that as a summary, because the thing we're doing today is basically we're going to have a look at both editions and see how they differ from one another, which is in some ways saying how has Terry Pratchett changed as a writer from the beginning of his career up until around the middle of his career. So, I mean, because that's quite like, was it? I'm trying to do maths here. And I know I'm just going to really show, it's about 20 years. That's
21 years
a bit more
later.
than 20 years. So, yeah, it's just showing how his ideas, priorities, and techniques have changed between two versions, because it is highly unusual for an author to come back and rewrite something so thoroughly and also print it. So yeah, it should be a good discussion. If not, I'm sorry, but we'll find that out together at the end. But we did want to specifically say thank you so much to Susie for lending us your copy, because honestly, if I owned it, I would have sat over me as I read it, maybe turning the pages for me, because it is so special. So that's very generous of her to lend it to both of us, and we treated it with the respect that it deserves. So thank you very much.
Really a real privilege. And look, and I don't know about you, Liz, but this has lit a fire under me. Like, I had vaguely considered before trying to find a copy of this book, knowing that it'd probably be difficult, and having seen, like, that the signed copies are very expensive and a bit hard to come by. But I am now definitely obsessed, and I will get myself a copy, because I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. Like, it's definitely kind of what we would now, I think, call, in some ways, a middle grade kind of book, in terms of how it's written. It feels like it's for younger readers. And I looked up some reviews from the time when it was first published, and it seems it was treated that way. Even at the time, it was sort of like treated as for kids. I mean, they didn't really categorize books quite that way back then as they do now. But yeah, it seemed like people were like, this is for kids, but it's fun. And it kind of is.
We got to get into the first main difference of like why we both so badly want an original one, though.
Yes.
Because it is illustrated.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
And the later one is not. Taking the illustrations out.
Shall we look at a few of the illustrations? We can look at a few as we go through. I will, hang on, just let me, there needs to be.
By him, aren't they?
They are. They're his own illustrations. He's really good. Like, I don't know. I wish he'd drawn more things. There's in the later editions, more recent editions of the book, there's a little illustration of himself that he did just after it was published. So it's labeled.
Is he leaning on a pile of logs?
No,
really cool glasses. And okay.
No, he's not. But he looks very similar. Like, he's already. I don't know if this is true, but he looks like he's already bald in this illustration, and it's supposedly from like early 1972. Like, I think it's from like January 1972. And also, the other thing it's worth looking at the newer editions for as well is that in the latest editions, they published the letter that he wrote to Colin Smythe about whether or not he should do a sequel, because he had ideas for one, and then he didn't end up writing it. But anyway, let's have a look at some of the illustrations. So this is the first illustration that pops up in the book. I'm just going to pin this so you can see it. I'm trying to make sure that this is going to look good on the video. It's very difficult because it looks much nicer for me than it does in the recordings, I know, but I'll hold this a little bit closer. So here's one of the very important characters we meet near the start. This is the horse Roland. We're going to assume, I think, Liz, we won't have time to go through the whole plot. So I think we're going to assume you're at least vaguely familiar with the plot of the Carpet People. If you're not, it's kind of like Lord of the Rings, but very, very small.
The quick run-through version is that it's a society that's entirely contained within a carpet, presumably in just one house, and they have their own history, they have their own societies, they have materials, they have a census, and suddenly Frey, this scary wind, starts picking up and destroying villages, and that sort of catalyzes a migration of people. But there's also sort of battles and forces at play in the background. So it is a quest book of these carpet people trying to deal with the natural forces of Frey, or is it a natural force, as well as societal issues between different groups, just to give a sort of like potted summary.
And they refer to the threads of the carpet as hairs that grow up out of the ground. That's what these things are in all the pictures. This is the little camp where Pismeyer, who we'll talk about in just a moment, I'm sure, lives. And this is the guy that our hero Snibble, who we will also talk about, meets when he goes there, who is not Pismeyer. He's very important. We'll come back to him. But yeah, it is a very, very old school sort of high fantasy Well, it's a little bit sword and sorcery-esque. There are some great. Oh, these are one of my favorite ones. So there's some great ones that are 2-page illustrations, particularly where there's a fight. This is the first major battle in the book. So this is a mole or a mole. How would you pronounce that word, Liz?
I was calling them moles because I kind of thought of them as mold. Like, because they were like everyone else, but they'd sort of gone wrong. So they were moldy to me.
That makes sense. And riding on a snarg, which is like a sort of giant lion crossed with a wolf kind of creature. This one's bigger than normal. And then this is Snibble coming in with his spear, riding his horse Roland. So there's some more illustrations. We'll come back to those. I won't try and show them all now. I'll just flick through a couple more because they are so good.
We've got to show the sugar lump. That's my favorite one. And the sugar lump. Give a sense of scale. Like a town is about the size of a full stop. A sugar lump is about the size of a town also.
That's one of the gates.
And by sugar lump, we mean a single crystal, not like a cube that you drop with tweezers into your tea at a fancy restaurant.
Crystal of sugar. It's in the middle here. It's sort of in the middle near the end as where, here we go. This is
there it is. That's my favorite illustration.
I feel like this one was originally much bigger. And then it's been shrunk down because it's got a lot of shading, which the other ones are generally just line drawings, but this one's got a lot of shading. And there's a couple others like this too. So it's really beautiful. And these are all the weird creatures of the carpet. You can see some poems in there, which are the sort of big dinosaur-like creatures. There's a lot of, it's an interesting mix actually, because the book, and this is something we'll talk more about when we eventually cover it on the podcast in more detail, but it's an interesting mix of, they always refer to creatures that are they're like regular creatures, like they refer to pigs and goats and things, but then they also refer to these weird fantasy creatures. So that's the wrong camera. There we go. That's better.
I keep getting you from every angle.
I know. Got too many things going on. Anyway, so
we're mostly audio, so we got to get all the visual we can while we've got the opportunity.
Yeah. Look, and I'll try to make this unlike every Zoom meeting you've ever been in during the whole pandemic period. Nobody wants that. But yeah, look, it is, I think the first and most important difference of the story is the tone is very serious. And not like serious as in like grim, dark, like awful, but serious as in this is a fantasy world we're expected to take totally seriously. And the characters take it totally seriously. And they just sort of, and stuff just happens and they just roll with it.
And there is sort of like and I don't want to read too much into it, but like when you're starting out, I think very early on, one of the characters, not always, has more of you in them than the others. And I feel like perhaps as a young man, he identified a lot with Snibble, not like so much. Like I'm not saying that he's like, this is me and this is the voice through which I'm speaking, but he was writing it as a very young man. Snibble is a very young man. So I think the changes we see in that character probably reflect his maturity as a person as well, because Snibble is very much like touched by destiny in the first version. Like he gets visions and he's led in his quest and he's got these very sort of set ideas about society, but he doesn't interrogate things very much. But the second version of him, he's a lot more clued in and willing to learn and change, and also has a lot more of a just some guy energy. Which makes him much more relatable actually to a broader audience.
Yeah, I agree. In the 71 version, he feels a bit like he's a chosen one, although no one ever quite puts it that way. I mean, they do explicitly tell him towards the end of the book, you're a hero because of all the things you've done. But, you know, there's a moment in that first fight that we showed the picture from where he suddenly has this surge of strength that allows him to lift up this spear, which he didn't have a spear, but someone manages to throw one just at the right time. So he's got one. And that happens again later in the book. And he also, in both versions of the story, this is true, but he also has the ability to sense when Frey is coming, which is not really explored
actually, I related
in the
to
original. Oh, did you?
Actually, I've got as in, so it's touched on, like, basically, I think things are a little bit more clear in the second one in terms of just how plot things unfold, what things are. It's not spelled out for you, but I found myself in the first version, because I read them in the order that they were written. So the first version I read was the first one he wrote. And I'd come out of a scene being like, I kind of know where everyone is now, but I'm not quite sure how they got there. Like, oh, I thought that guy was with them, but oh no, he's not. And yes, there was a fight scene, but how did he end up defeating? Whereas in the second one, I felt that because he had a lot more experience writing, he gave us more clues so we can see what's happening a lot more. So like in the scene you were describing about Snibble in the first one, sort of defeating the beast. In the second one, we learn how he does it through logic and how he's been taught to hunt and use like things to his advantage. I can't remember where I was going with that. I know I was heading towards a really good point, but then I got waylaid. All of the fun of, because yeah, these are both very enjoyable books for very different reasons. But
yeah, I think the first one has a real we've talked about this on the podcast with a couple of children's authors who've been on, who have said that one of the big differences in middle grade writing is you just tell the audience what's happening and they just accept it and you keep going. Like you don't have to answer any questions about why things are happening, or if there's an evil force attacking them, you don't have to give it a motivation. Like the audience of middle grade readers will, and kids will just accept those things at face value and go, great, let's get to the cool bits, let's get to the action. And as you get older, you kind of have a more appreciation and an interest in, but why are these things happening? And why does this person want to do that? And I feel like the first version doesn't really give much of a motivation to most of the characters because they don't really need one. They're in an epic fantasy adventure and their motivation is there's an evil force coming to destroy them all. They've got to do something about it. That's it. And so they never stop to ask questions about those things. What was it?
I remember where I was going with that. You were saying about not quite understanding his whole thing where he can detect Frey, because that is the thing that sets him apart. Other than the fact that he's like the second in line to the chieftainship of his clan.
Yeah, he's the younger brother of Glurk. What a great name. The names in this are so good. Glurk, Orkson, and then and Snibble Orkson are the two Orkson brothers of the Munrung tribe. Fantastic stuff.
It's just got all of the words a great mouthfeel. It is.
They do.
Wonderful.
They do.
I love the guy that has been cast out of his society. He's called Bane. That is brilliant.
Well, who we later discover is General Banius Catrix. Which is very like so there's clearly some very definite like inspirations or what's the other word I'm looking for, influences on this book.
References maybe.
And I think it's important to remember when it was first published, 1971, that's like 15 16 years, maybe 17 years, less than 20 years after Lord of the Rings is first published. So Lord of the Rings is still this huge influence on the entire world of fantasy publishing. I mean, it still is today, but back then it was massive, and it just sort of been through this sort of big resurgence in popularity, or was in the midst of that because that was happening in the 60s and 70s. So it was hugely influential. And there's a lot of stuff in this book, particularly in the first version, where you can kind of go, okay, so Snibble's a little bit like, he's not really Frodo, but he's a little bit like Frodo. But also more they're kind of, I think they're more like what are their brothers from Gondor? They're more like Boromir and Faramir in a way.
It's like Sean Bean is what my brain just kept saying.
An Australian guy. No.
He actually broke his toe in that scene, so there's that.
Oh God, it's turning into a Lord of the Rings discussion. No, but yeah, there are a lot of parallels there to be had.
But to get to the point that I was trying to make a while ago, and I veered away. So Frey, it's never told explicitly, but we figure out that very likely it is a vacuum cleaner. And that's an interesting show of the passage of time in here, because I'm like, how long is this person taking to do this room? But like they probably live like whole lifetimes in the time it takes us to vacuum a room. So
I had a question about this. Do you think, I don't want to get too off the topic of this because we want to get back to the differences between the editions, but do you think that the carpet, which is what they call their world, where all of the peoples, the Dumei, the Whites, the Vortgorns, everybody, they all live there. I got the impression it's not, while it does go up to the wall, it's not like I couldn't figure out if it was meant to be like a big rug kind of carpet that goes on top of a surface. But then because when they go underneath it, they go into the underlay. I'm like, no, it has to be a laid carpet.
Be
like
actual carpet, yeah.
So, but then it's all different colors. And I'm like, who has a laid carpet that's all these different colors? It's got a pattern in it.
I had no issues with that at all, because The first house we lived in Australia, the people who built it, they clearly could not decide on a vibe that they were going for. So every room had a different colored carpet.
Oh, that's the worst.
So I feel like maybe there's a big open plan house with different rooms and hallways and stuff, which the carpets change, or it could be like a rug with patterns, like you say, like it could be like a tartan bit. But I feel like there'd be more of a regularity.
Well, because they visit the different places and it only takes them a couple of days. Like when you imagine the scale, and in the 92 edition, in the introduction, he does have a thing where, by the way, the size of the city of Ware is about this, and then he's got like a period. Like it's a full stop. That's how big it is. You're like, okay, well, it can't be that they're going into another room of the house. That would take them years.
Yeah, but also there's a coin where they mine all their metals, and I feel like if you had a coin on a rug in a very visible spot, you'd pick it up at some point, but it's clearly been there for generations, so it can't be that visible. But I mean, maybe that's like an hour is generations.
I don't know. I mean, I presume it's got to be a very thick carpet. Actually, the coin, this was a fun little difference between the editions. In the original, in the 71 edition, they refer to it as having 12 sides, which probably means it was a 3-pence piece. And this is interesting because that is a pre-decimal coin, and decimalization happened in 1971 in the United Kingdom. So that would have been a coin that you might not pick up because you're like, well, I don't need that anymore. That's the old money. And maybe that's why it's sitting on the carpet forever. Yeah. Well, I mean, and also, like, what kind of vacuum do they have that it doesn't suck up a coin? Like, this is, I mean, I guess it's a 1971 vacuum cleaner.
I don't reckon, like, it depends. Like, what if it's one of those ones that spins around but like couldn't pick up a coin? Because there's different ones that suck really like hard, and then there's ones that kind of like will get the small things but not the big things because their belly can't deal with it. So not that I know a lot about vacuum cleaners, but I think that some would be specifically designed not to pick up larger stuff.
Yeah,
maybe. I don't know. But what I was going to say about him detecting Frey, so Snibberell's whole thing is that he can sense it a few minutes before it happens, and that sort of, he slowly starts to realize that's what's going on because he gets this kind of headachy thing. And not to be like I am the hero of the story, but I get headaches before thunderstorms, which sounds like a whole lot of like mumbo jumbo.
But you do,
and it sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but apparently, having done some research on it, and not intense research, changes in like atmospheric pressure can do stuff to your inner ear, and that can sometimes cause a very specific kind of headache. So maybe that's what he might have, a ear problem like me. And so he can just detect that there's a pressure change in the air before any of the other things come in. So yeah.
But look, it's interesting that they don't do a lot. He doesn't do a lot differently with that in the two books. There's a bit more chatter in the 92 version towards the end where he explains that he can tell, and they sort of explicitly have a conversation about the fact that I don't know how, but I can tell even before most animals can tell that Frey is coming. But the problem is the moles or the mules, they can also tell, but they're better at it than him. So he gives them some warning, but whereas that's kind of not, they don't really talk about that in the original. It's sort of just, we know he knows. But I mean, he's also, like you say, like he's a bit more clued in and a bit more everyman in the later edition. He's a bit more of just a normal person caught up in events, as opposed to someone fated to save the world, which is a little bit his vibe in the first one.
And I found an interesting change in that. Like, there's this scene that I find actually really sad where he ends up in this cave of the last creature that its gaze turns things to stone. And in the first version, I'm terrible at remembering the words, so thank you. So in the first version, he's sent there by a vision, like he's sort of made to go there, whereas in the second one, things are being turned to stone in their camp and he just goes to check it out and fixes it. So the end result is the same, but the way he gets there, very different, and it has a really different, it colors the character in a very different way. I really liked that.
And there's lots of little changes like that to most of the characters and the plot points. Like the broad plot, apart from a couple of bigger changes, is pretty much the same. But a lot of the characters, they still do the same things. They fulfill the same function in the plot, but there's, maybe slightly different reasons for why they do it, or and I think the two big ones, one is Snibble, and the other one is Glurk. Like Glurk has this whole other one of his major things that he does when he's sort of separated from everyone else is quite different. But we'll get to that. Let's try and get to a few of the other differences, because I don't want us to run out of time. It'd be so easy to talk about this book for like a normal length of time, which is like 3 hours. It's so good. But anyway, I do also love the difference in Pismeyer, who is the sort of, in the original, he's a very Gandalf-like figure. Like I think he's described, I think it's literally, I'm just going to look up the word if I can find it, but I think he's literally described as a magician at one point. Whereas, and several other things, but in the newer one, he's specifically described as a shaman, but not a shaman like the other shaman. He's like the one who actually just has common sense and has thought about things and has actual knowledge. Whereas in the original one, he just tells people what the deal is and they just listen to him. And
he is kind of a shaman without that much of a backstory in the first one.
Yeah. Whereas in the second one, he's got this whole backstory that you find out later on that he's from the city of Ware, but that it's not in the first version. It's not the case. He's just one of the Munrungs who's their wizard guy. Well, he might not be one of them. That's not entirely clear, but he lives near them, and
it's everyone in this, like most of the key characters in this book, it feels like they've got stories that extend beyond the pages of this, whereas in the first one it feels like they were for the most part dropped in and they exist within the parameters of the book. That doesn't make it a bad book. It just shows that as he's matured as a writer, he knows that it enriches the experience of people if you get to know everyone a little bit more as individuals, even if it doesn't impact the plot too much.
Absolutely. And Glurk's kind of the same. I really like Glurk.
Saying Glurk, just say Glurk a few more times. It's the best.
A fun name to say, but I really like Glurk. Like he's the older brother, and he's painted like in both editions. They describe he's not that smart, but also he's not stupid. He just I can't remember if this is in the first edition. This problem is I started reading them. I tried reading like chapters at the same time so I could really make note about all the differences, and then that became too hard.
Your poor brain.
I stopped doing that. But I think in the newer one, like they describe him as sort of it might be in both, but he gets there in the end, but he just takes the long way around. It's basically and he's not stupid. He doesn't behave in a stupid way. He's just a bit slow and thinks about things before he does them. Whereas Snibble is kind of, he's got a swift brain. He like makes smart decisions fairly quickly. But Glurk is great. I love Glurk. But then there's Pismeyer, and then there's first sort of changes. I think the first time you notice big changes if you're reading the original edition is kind of in the second chapter, apart from the tone of how it's going, where there's the first fight. And this is where Frey comes and destroys part of their village. And this is after they've found this horse on the road, Roland, who we showed a picture of before. So Snibble and Glurk are out hunting. They come home with the horse, and then Frey knocks down some of the hares in the village and smashes the chieftain's hut. And after that, they get attacked by the Snargs, which are these wolfy lion things being ridden by the moles or moles. I'm going to keep saying both because I don't know which one is right. But it's again, here's moles, this is where this is where some of those changes start coming in, because this giant Snarg is just given a name. It's Snarfgorm, king of the Snargs.
Snarfgorm.
And we don't know why. Like we don't know where that knowledge comes from. We're just told and we accept it. It's just part of the law of the world. But then, in the new edition, that's revised. So it's just some big Snarg. It's just the biggest one in that pack. And so that gives that a bit of a different feel.
And it's not in the second one, because Snibble ends up getting a white belt from this battle. It comes from the mole rather than from the Snarg in the second one, doesn't it? I could be remembering that wrong.
Oh, I don't know, but it's definitely around the neck of the Snarg here. Yeah. And it's implied that this beast has had it for a long time, because when they later talk to the whites, they have been missing it for a long time.
On that note, should we start talking about the whites, because they're quite significant and there's a big change between the books?
Yeah.
All
They're very, very different. So in the original, they're basically elves, right? Like I'm not imagining that. They're very much like, they're like the first people of the carpet, and they are mysterious, and they keep their counsel to themselves, and they meet them. And this is a big moment in chapter 4. They come across a group of 7 whites on the road, and they get invited to a feast.
Sevens,
yeah, they're always in sevens. That's right. Yeah. And only 7 of them are allowed to go to the meeting. And this is after they've met Bane, by the way. Bane is with them now. And then this meeting is very different in the 2 books. So
the first one, I was kind of like, I'm not sure if I love this. Like, it's interesting, but I was kind of like, it's just a bit too familiar. Basically they have a sort of mystical meeting where they all sit around, and then the guy summons out his daughter, who sort of tells each of the people what they all most want.
Yeah.
And I didn't I mean, not to bang a drum that we hear a lot, but in the first version, women are very, like, pretty much non-existent except for really bit trope parts. So that's a big change between the versions as well. But yes, the big change in these scenes, like, we get the whites become a whole different thing, and it changes kind of the trajectory of the book, and also kind of the end sequence as well.
Yeah. And there's not as many pictures of the whites, actually. I'm just sort of flicking through the book. But yeah, that whole sequence, because they give them each, it's a cool concept. Like, she comes out and does this sort of mystical dance, and she plucks a hair from each of their heads and then twists them all together with one of her own hairs and does some sort of mystical business, and then pulls out each hair and says, you want this and you want that. And they give them all presents. And it's very like the fellowship meeting Galadriel and getting a bunch of stuff to help them on their quest.
No, I would love that, like, in my real life. But I don't know, maybe. And I didn't, but I guess I like the change they made, though I was waiting for that scene to come in the second one, being like, how are they going to adapt it, and they didn't. So it was kind of, I feel like I just, like, swung around on that. I'm like, I don't know if I liked it, and I'm like, now I miss it. But yeah.
So can I actually, sorry, I just want to check. So you hadn't read it at all before you read both versions? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I read the 92 version. I read in like 1995. Like, so I'm now going back in time to before. And it was interesting because I hadn't read it for a long time, so I didn't remember it very well. But I'm reading the old version first. And I'm like, this is not how I remember this book, but it's very interesting. But yeah, I do love the whites, and they've got great names. There's that bit where he meets in the later version, where the whites are sort of these people who remember the future. Basically, they remember their whole lives, even the bits that haven't happened yet, and that's part of their mystic power of being able to master the carpet. But he meets one. Snebrel meets one at the dinner, whose name is Norrell, and he just says, "Yeah, my name's Norrell." Whereas in the original one, he's like, we keep our names to ourselves, but I get called many things. And he lists all these names that he's been called. And he says, you can call me Norrell, which is one of my names. And okay, well, they've simplified that quite a lot. That's a good call, Pratchett. That's a good call.
And I think it's because of, like, years of Mrs. Cake in between. We're like, we don't need to be that mystic about it. We can have some fun with some future telling, and there's some nice, like, awkward dinner conversation based around, they know what they're going to say, but they can't say that, and it's just it's a delight to read.
I'm going to show
how comfortable it is.
I'm just going to show a couple of pictures, because there is a great picture of this is the Whites camp.
Why are the pictures gone? They're so good.
I know. Well, I mean, there is an edition of the newer book that has the illustrations in it, that was published, I think, in about 2005. And I would like to see that too, because I'd be interested to see how that's sort of married with the text in the new one. And I just want to, there's one I skipped over before that is one of my other favorites, which is the Hymenors or Hymentors. They're like sort of the bees of the carpet, but they're very dangerous, and they're big compared to the carpet people. So they're great. And you can see this, there's a great sense of scale, even in this drawing. Like, you can see here's the little people pulling their little cart. And these are the giant hairs of the carpet. Gives you an idea how big it is. I love that. But yeah, the other thing with the whites is that they they give them all these presents, but also that scene, it's a big plot difference too, because the thing that Bane wants is to go home. So they entirely blow the gaff on his secret identity. That he is actually a general from Dumia. They just reveal it there, and they give him a whole suit of armor, and they're like, you should go home, we'll give you your heart's desire. Whereas we don't find out what his deal is in the 92 edition until much later. Not
though
properly.
We kind of get a lot more clues, because like Snibble's been like, why does Pismeyer keep calling him general? And he's the only one who's sort of noticing like these slip ups.
Yeah, which does happen in the original, but then it's revealed the next chapter, so it's not much of a kind of a tip off. And Bane also seems to, this is something entirely missing from the 92 edition, but Bane clearly has a thing for Norrell's daughter, although Pratchett spends no time on this except hinting it in chapter 4, and then he marries her at the end. Like that's pretty much it.
I'm shocked that the only woman that has a line isn't already someone's wife ends up someone's love interest. I'm so taken aback.
I mean, there are literally 2 women characters in the whole of the original book. There's Norrell's daughter, who does have a name. Her name is what is it? I forgot. I can't find it, but she does have a name. And then there's Bertha, who is Glurk's wife. Glurk's wife, Bertha. Who is great. Like, she does a couple of things that are quite good, but she is still very definitely a secondary character, so that's a bit of a bummer. And Bane keeps the hair from Norrell's daughter, like he hangs on to it. And they keep traveling. And look, a lot of this bit in the middle is largely the same plot-wise. They travel through to the lands of the Deftmeans, another great name. But on the way there is where they meet the Termagant, who is like it's like a what's the I keep wanting to say Medusa. This is great. Hang on, we've got to show the picture of the Termagant. Here he is. Hang on. It's so cute. Oh, I love this spine.
It's so sad. This whole in just a few pages. I don't know if I should look at him, because you know what happens when you look at him.
No, but he's got tears in his eyes. That means you're safe.
Okay.
But it's such a beautiful drawing. I love the Termagant.
And it's rendered so well in both versions, because it is a very sad thing, because basically what's happened is Termagants were very territorial, and he's chased them all the other ones out of his territory.
Yeah.
But over the years, he's noticed that there haven't been any around. And it's very likely he's the last one. He had these people who worshipped him, brought him gifts and stuff that apparently didn't seem like very nice people, which is convenient because they decide to leave them as statues. So, okay, in both versions. But what essentially happens is he catches a glimpse of himself in a shield and feels like he's less alone. And sort of my reading was that he dies somewhat happy to not feel the loneliness that he's had for possibly centuries or minutes, depending on whether we're using our time or their time.
See, this was another difference that I saw between them, because in the original, it's not, he just sort of lays down and dies, whereas it felt like in the 92 version, there's a bit more or a bit more description of him letting out a sigh, because in the 92 version, because Snibble shows him his reflection in his shield, he doesn't get turned to stone himself, but he sees himself and for a moment thinks, oh, another Termagant, and then realizes when he tilts the shield, oh no, it's not. That's when he starts crying. He realizes he's truly alone. But then he just sort of cries a lot and then lays down and just dies in the original. Whereas in the second one, he like cradles the shield to him and he's like looking at his reflection going, oh, I wish there was another and then he sort of quietly dies.
It's nicer,
a bit more content.
Version.
Yeah, so I think it's a bit nicer in
upsetting.
the second one. But both very upsetting. I agree. But he also there saves Brocando.
King Broccoli.
Oh, I love Brocando. And he's one of the Deftmeans, and they're like quite small. They're kind of like hobbit or dwarf size, I guess, compared to the other people of the carpet. And quite deft. And it turns out he's the king of Jeopard. That's just... How many good names have you got? Like, I mean, come on. I mean, they are a little bit, let's be honest, they're a little bit on the daft side, but they're so fun to say.
Deft side. Yeah, but I mean, say what you will about Jeopard, they've got grit.
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. And I mean, going to Jeopard is, I mean, yeah, but that's when they have adventures. Again, we don't want to get too way down in the plot. That's kind of
we
the
don't have
same in
time to
both.
go through all of the amazing plot.
No, but Bracando's character is quite different in both books. Like, not radically different, but the way that the others sort of see him, I think, is more the change. But in the original, in the 71 edition, he's just sort of this brave dude, like, who's the king, and he's a bit brash, but he's he's good, but he's quite straightforward. Whereas in the 92 edition, Pratchett puts this extra layer of kind of monarchy, criticism on top of him, where he behaves a bit like a modern day royal, in that he's like, oh, that's quite interesting. What do you do? Oh, I see. Yes, excellent. And has a few more things to say about kings. There's a lot more political, not snide. There's a lot more political commentary in the 92 edition, I feel.
Yeah, and a sort of side-eyed view about currency and how it makes people complacent and moves people away from different ways of living. But yeah, it's there, like you say, there's a lot more political commentary in this one. I do enjoy that there's kind of like they've all got Brock names. It made me think about broccoli quite a lot. I ended up
Bracando's son of Brock.
Yeah.
Who
would play him in the movie? Do you think it's The Rock? The Brock? Sorry.
No, it'd have to be someone very small.
They can scale him down. If they can scale down Jonathan Rhys-Davies to play Gimli, they can scale down The Rock.
That's him on the statue that opens the secret passageway into the city of Jeopard. And this is the underlay. Ooh, creepy. And again, great sense of scale. Look how small these little characters are.
Like underlay, yeehaw kind of thing. Or
I did think that once or twice while reading it. It's a fun word to say. Yes, as they go into the Palace of Brock. But again, this scene's pretty similar. Again, lots of little changes. Character motivations are in there more. So in the original, when they get into the city and they depose the moles who are kind of holding, not holding ransom, but sort of, influencing and forcing the new king, Antiroch, to do what they want, and they're enslaving all of the deaf means. When he sort of wins that battle in the original book, his people want to throw Antiroch off the balcony, and he just says, "No, don't do that. We won't do that." But in the later one, he's like, "Yep, that sounds right," and he has to be talked out of it by Snibble and the others because he's a king, and he's like, "No, that's what we do. We throw people off the rock." So again, little changes like that. I'm going to stay on this camera for a little while, Liz, because there's just so many good pictures. I want to show them off.
And it is kind of like a big ripple of changes through the whole thing, because in the newer version, it's more about challenging tradition and thinking about why we do the things we do, and also about legacy, whereas the original one does have themes, does have deeper meaning, but I think he's not exploring them as much, and he's got more ideas that he wants to get across in the second one, because ultimately, like, Bracando sort of going like, oh, well, tradition is to throw people off the thing, or we have kings is what we do. All of that ripples through to the end of the book and how things resolve very differently to the first one.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the pones?
Oh, yeah, we've got to talk about the pones too. I'm really up to that bit in the book. I mean, and before we get the pones, one other major plot change is that in the original, Glurk here, who you saw a few pages back here, bravely, and I do enjoy that scene in both editions, but he holds up the entrance to the palace of Jeopard so that people can escape when it's all being pushed, being destroyed by the influence of Frey. And he ends up getting knocked out, and the others have to sort of escape with him back into the underlay, and they get captured. But in the original, he just gets left behind, and he follows them to try and save them, the other three, when they're captured by the Moors. But he just sort of has this lucky adventure where he happens to just knock the right Vortgorn on the head, who can tell him all about the city and what needs to happen, and gives him all the information. Whereas in the 92 edition, totally revised, like he meets up with the
changed character who's like
Yeah, which we'll come to. But he meets a character who's quite. We'll come back to that. But here,
there we go.
Here are the pones. They're like giant, like dinosaur-y kind of creatures. They're very cute.
They're my favorite.
Look at their faces. This is so cute. And there's a great picture. I think it's here we go. This is them flying around. Interestingly, in the original edition, it said that they don't really have proper wings. They more sort of have these kind of skin flaps that let them glide. Whereas in the 92 edition, they can just fly. It's like they've got tiny little wings, but somehow they can still fly. And I'm like, that's an interesting change. But yes, this is Kalsomena. This is the name. This is the Vortkorn that Clerk knocks on the head, who just happens to give him all the right information. But in the 92 edition, very different. Oh, there's Glurk taming the snarg that he captures.
But in the later one, it's like, well, you're just going to be a little bit nice to them. You're also going to be a bit cruel to them. But
yeah, there's a lot of, like in this one, there's a whole chapter, which is Glurk just sort of recounting his adventure that he had without the others. Whereas that's kind of folded into the action in the other one. And because it's a different adventure that he has, he kind of just says to them, oh, you'll find out when we get there, you'll find out. Because he's met Collane, who in the 92 edition is called Collana and is like the only gender swapped character, but in the original is Collane. I assume named after the Irish folk hero of more or less the same name. But in the 71 edition, they just meet Collane by accident, more or less, because that's where Akatung the poem takes them to the giant sugar crystal. And then they just meet him and he's like, yeah, I'm a Thunog. We've sort of just gone our separate ways. And it's, again, it's very elfy. Like it's sort of said that, the Thunogs and the Whites were the same people, but the Thunogs went off to learn about the carpet. Whereas the Whites sort of learned how to master the carpet. But
the new version, I'm a big fan of what he decided to do there. And make it sort of like they are rare versions of White that not only see the future, they see all possibilities and all possible realities. So they're kind of like these outcast weirdos in some ways.
And it's not clear that there's more than one of them either at the time.
To each generation, one is born.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. Whereas in the original, they're like a whole other like race of whites, I guess, in Dungeons and Dragons terms. And there's a nice sort of action packed. This is when they meet the whites who are being attacked by mules and they're fighting and defending themselves. That's quite a different plot point too, because in the original, Athen, who is the white who leads this group, just sort of goes, oh, thanks for your help. And Snibbrel's like, can you come and fight with us? And he's like, you want whites to fight? That we don't do that. And he's like, oh, come on.
But it rhymes.
And then he goes, yeah, look, yeah, he doesn't really give him an answer. And then they just disappear. Whereas in the new version, because the whites are supposed to be able to remember their future, he remembers he's going to die. And then Snibbrel saves him and it changes his future. And now he doesn't know what's going to happen next. And it really freaks him out. So he and his mates go with them back to where, and he vanishes later. So there's
about choice, free will, tradition, all of that coming in another way in the new version.
Yeah. Again, there's all these jokes in the new edition that are not in here. Like there's a couple of moments of lightness, but it's generally delivered pretty straight. And also the dialogue is very traditional fantasy dialogue in here. Like, whereas they speak more like normal people in the 92 edition. Here's some more pictures here. This is interesting too. In the 71 edition, they meet this guy Karis, who is the leader of the 15th Legion of the Dumii. So Snibbrel meets him after he's been separated from the others, and he's a general and he's in charge. And he eventually makes Snibbrel a captain in the army so that he can command the Munrungs and the Deftmeans, who don't want to be commanded by the Dumii because there's this sort of rivalry there. Whereas in the newer version, he's a general. He's not a sergeant. He's not a general. He's a sergeant because the general's been killed. And there's a whole thing about how basically generals are kind of useless and you need sergeants. And there's a whole extra scene with like the sergeants in the capital who are all been made cooks. It's great. But that's not in the original. Good.
Mealy.
Oh, Mealy. I think Mealy is mentioned in passing as a character, but not a major character. Oh, and this is chapter 18 when they're on the march. There's the marching song that's in there. Very Lord of the Rings. Got to put the songs in there. And then there's also the song about Tan Tadlin, the mythical giant that Snibble tells the story about. There's also a bit of a song about him. I won the king of Slochkin's daughter. Great. Okay. There's some great names.
Just a quick thing on Mealy though, because basically what happens is when they get to the main city of Ware, they realize that it's a similar situation to Jeopard, where the Moors have tricked the leader into letting them secretly pull the strings and destroy things by using the lie that they can detect and send Frey wherever they want, whereas actually they can just tell when it's coming. But the Emperor, who is a hereditary emperor rather than an elected one, which is a problem in Bane's eyes, is foolish. And that basically it started from there. He's kind of letting this all happen. So they have to lead a charge. And part of the charge is getting all the sergeants from the kitchens to sort of help out. And that's like Mealy's brigade. And I don't know if it's because we just read The Last Hero, but I got very much that kind of energy from them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And none of that is in the 71 edition. None of it. Like the whole thing where the emperor used to be an elected position, but then the previous emperor decided it would be hereditary so his son could take over. That's not in the 71 edition. In the 71 edition, the emperor has not made any deal with the Mauls. The Mauls aren't in Ware. He just dies when Frey first shakes the city because he and his courtiers take refuge in a temple that collapses. He's just dead. And then
Bane plot-wise so that Bane can become
although it's not clear that he will at the end, which is kind of nice, but that's kind of weird. Whereas, in the 92 edition, he's going to get elected president probably.
He's like a little Joffrey Twerp in this one.
Yeah, the son of the emperor is kind of completely useless. In fact, worse than useless.
There's a great line about the whiny voice of someone who has been given sweets too often and not told no enough. Like, I'm paraphrasing there, but it was a very good summary.
Yeah. But again, none of that's in the 71 edition. What we do have in the 71 edition is this guy. This is Stagbat, King of the Vortgerns, who is mentioned briefly in passing in the 92 edition. But in this edition, what happens with the Vortgerns is they're forced to fight for the Mauls because the Mauls have managed to get them way into their lands, the Highgate lands, which is on the top of the penny, which is much more explicit in the 92 edition. There's a reference to the writing that's on the penny and how big it is. But anyway, in this edition,
I didn't get that that's what it was in the first one. I was just kind of like, it's something.
I think the fact that it had 12 sides threw me off because I had to look up. I didn't immediately pick that up either. But in this one, the King of the Vortgerns is forced to go along because they've holding the Vortgerns' wives and children hostage because, of course, only the men do the fighting in the 71 edition. And they're forced to fight for the Mauls because they think the Mauls can call down Frey wherever they want, which is not the case. But the Snibble sneaks out and captures or liberates the King of the Vortgerns and brings him back. And he's like, oh, look, just don't kill my mates before you kill me. And they're like, we're not going to kill any of you if we can avoid it. He said, but the Mauls said you kill all your prisoners. And they're like, well, we don't. So, and there's a whole subplot there where eventually the Vortgerns who are on the battlefield fighting with the Mauls eventually see that they can't control Frey and they turn on them. And that helps. It's one of the things that helps turn the tide of the battle, including, there's other things too in the original edition.
I quite like that. And I was kind of sad to not see it in there, but I also feel it might have been one thing too many with the changes to the battle made already.
Yeah. And look, that final battle has several moments where things turn around, which is maybe too many. So the whites show up with their flaming balls of dust that they're flinging with their machines and then join in the fighting. And then there's, the Vortgerns turn on the Mauls, and then also just as Frey is doing its third pass closest to the city where it's supposed to be destroying Ware, that's when the Thunurgs turn up, and there's heaps of them, and they sing a song and stop the city from being totally destroyed, and that's what helps the Vortgerns realize, oh well, maybe they don't control Frey, and then the Thunurgs also contribute by summoning all the creatures of the carpet, which all come and fight the Mauls as well. So it's very they're very Treebeardy, I think. Which is
very Helm's
good.
Deep. Like, is that the big battle where everyone keeps showing up?
Yeah, I mean, and it does feel, again, that's a very clear influence, and you can kind of go, oh, this bit is very much like this, but it's not exactly the same. It's just a clear influence throughout the book. Here's a picture of Snibble at the end, because once everything is kind of cleared up, Snibble goes, you know what? I'm heading off for my own adventures, and here he is. I can animate him. You ready? Here he goes.
Yeah,
I gotta go. Yeah,
oh, there he goes.
So those are. I think we covered a lot of the things. I mean, we could talk about this for 3 hours and get really.
I could talk about it for more than 3 hours. Like, it's not that it's a competition, but yeah, I think we've covered the main ones. Like, the poems themselves, I could probably do a good 45 minutes at least on. But
they
yeah,
are the best.
And want one, but also like that's their thing. They're intelligent, and then they just go where what interests them. And I love that change as well. They're like, we're a bit bored by this, so we're gonna leave. And we could have done that at any time, but
yeah.
Nothing else going on until now.
Yeah. So I guess if we were going to sum up the kind of what's the difference here, what would we say? I mean, like the final battle's quite different. If you've read the 92 version, you know that it's more about what the main characters do, influenced by the Thunog Kalena, who is the only gender swap character, and a few other things that they decide to do. Like Bracando decides against the wishes of Bane, he's going to arm all the women who are there. Oh, and Bane actually sits most of the final battle out in the 71 edition. He gets hit by a poisoned arrow and goes into a coma for like most of the battle.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, and then Snibble has to have this like one-on-one battle with the slave master guy from Jeopard who escaped earlier in the book. And he gets crushed under a statue. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens that you're like, why is that happening exactly? I'm not sure, but it is fun and adventurous. But it feels, it feels like a novel written by someone 20 years younger.
Yeah. So like you're asking about summing up the differences. I would say that the original Carpet People, it feels like a really fun, enjoyable, pacey fantasy book. Like it's a quest, it's a journey, and a lot happens, and it's just a hell of a fun read. Yeah. Whereas the revised Carpet People feels like using a fantasy to explore themes more than primarily focusing on telling a fantasy story. It does both very well, but I think themes and messages are more of a focus in the second one. Like it's about challenging tradition, about challenging like monarchy, that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's more Discworld-y, I guess. It's using the genre to get some ideas across and make some commentary.
Yeah, and it gives us reasons for things more. In the original one, the Dumii and the Deafmeans don't like each other, but and there's a little bit about, they like counting things, they like putting things in rows, but it's never really explained what the difference is because, the Deafmeans also have farms and cities and stuff. So it's like, well, what is the big difference there? And there's a whole thing where Snibble in the 92 edition sort of basically, rags on them as like, you are part of the Empire. Like you say you're not, but like the whole reason you can fight the Empire is because they're keeping you safe from everybody else. And you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yep. All right.
Who is everyone else? Like the kitchen people?
I don't know. But look, it's a great fun read. And I think if there's anything we can say in summation, if you can get a chance to read the original, give it a go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there's not a lot written about it online. There's like snippets here and there, but it seems like the fact that it's quite a rare book means it's a little bit harder to find stuff out about it. So hopefully this has been a good sort of primer. We'll discuss it again, obviously, on the podcast when we get to the book. Definitely, I think. Is there anything else you want to say, Liz, before we wrap this up? Because we should go. We've been here for about an hour.
One final thing. How dare he be so talented from a young age? Because you can feel that skill and the wordplay and the cogs turning, even when he had started this book at 17. So I'm thrilled for all of us who love Terry Pratchett that he was clearly so good from the beginning and so prolific because he just had his head in the game. But also, how dare he?
Yeah,
like, just very good.
How rude! How rude! Look, we might leave it there. Thank you so much for having us, Nihilist Anxietus folk. It has been a pleasure. It's a real privilege. Thanks again to Susie for lending us the book. I'm so excited to get my own copy of this and read it again. And or possibly read this again before I give it back to you. No, I won't do that. I'll get it back to you as soon as I can. But yes, enjoy the rest of the fun day. And yeah, well, I don't know how we sign off when we're not doing the end of the podcast. Liz, what should we say?
Oh, I guess we just say the truth, which is that we hope that everyone has a nice rest of their day or evening, and that we will see them in due course. If you'd like to find us, we're on what's our website?
It's pratchatpodcast.com. And of course, if you want to listen to the show, you can just search for Pratchat in whatever podcast directory or app you use, and you will find us. But thank you very much.
Brilliant.